كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear students, welcome to lesson 6. We carry on with the discussion on ikrah that we had started, which refers to compulsion and pressure and force. So now he discusses, he says, ikrah is of two types. إما ملجئ بأن يكون بفوت النفس أو العضو وهذا معدم للرضا محسن الاختيار. So we discussed the compelling compulsion. I mean, what a weird word that is. Meaning the severe compulsion, which leads to loss of lives or loss of limb, and the non-severe one or the lesser one, which is more to do with maybe imprisoned or lightly beaten or something like that. So now the conditions that we had discussed, the conditions as well, that only a sultan, according to Abu Hanifa, could do this. From anybody else it's not valid because nobody had that kind of power, but that was understood to be in Imam Abu Hanifa's time. The Sahibain, they say that it could be from anybody that you believe can carry out what they're telling you, and because by his time there were many groups who could do this. Right, so now what we're going to be discussing in today's lesson is al-ikrahu ala bay'i malihi. If somebody's forced to sell his wealth, does it actually get sold or not? Right? Is there an actual transfer of ownership that takes place? And then if somebody does have to undertake something like this, and they lose their free will and choice to do it, and they do it, then and they lose something in that regard, can they get compensation for it? Can they be compensated for it by the obligator, by the person who put pressure, the compeller? Right? So the discussion of liability, the discussion of compensation is going to be done today as well, right? Then we're going to be discussing the things whether it is better to do that which you're compelled to do, or when it is better not to, or when you have a choice. So there's three cases where if you're compelled to do something, then in certain cases you should do it. Otherwise you'd be sinful if you died by not doing it, right? Where you have a choice and it's better not to do it, but it's permissible to do it. And the third one is where you shouldn't do it even under compulsion, otherwise you'd be sinful for doing it. And you just have to, the matter is too serious for that. So we're going to discuss these and a few more points today, inshallah, related to that. A lot of that will come under these 2 points anyway. So inshallah, let's begin with that. So the first mas'ala here is وَإِذَا أُكْرِهَ الرَّجُلُ عَلَى بَيْءِ مَالِهِ أَوْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَى شِرَاءِ سِلْعَةٍ. So that's the discussion here, is if a person is forced to sell something, he doesn't want to sell it, but he's forced to sell it, a piece of land, a house, a business, or he's forced to buy something, right? Or he's forced to confess that he owes X amount of money to so-and-so. Or he's forced to rent out his property. And the force is that he's going to be killed otherwise. Or he's going to be severely beaten. Or he's going to be imprisoned for a very, very long time. Right? So in all of these cases now, if he does end up selling or buying, right? If he ends up selling or buying, right? Out of fear for that. Remember, we spoke about how it must be that you believe that they can carry out what they're threatening you with, and it's not something you want to do, obviously. It's not something you've done before as such. So in all of these cases, he's got a choice. Because remember, he can sign or not sign. He can sell or not sell. He can just refuse and be killed or be beaten or whatever. إن شاء أمضى البيع وإن شاء فسخه ورجع بالمبيت. Now, let's just say that he did it. No, let's just say he actually did sign it. He was forced to do it in that really extreme, compelling situation. So he sold, or he bought, or he did whatever. After that, mashallah, he was out of that compulsion situation, and he has now a choice. So he's saying that once, he's back on track, he has now a choice that he can let the sale be and authorize it. Because until now, it was kind of more of a suspended sale. Obviously, the person who's bought it thinks it's his, but it's more of a suspended sale, really. It's not been done with his satisfaction, so that's why it's not going to be halal for the other person. However, now, if he wants, he can let it be and, okay, carry on. وَإِنْ شَاءَ فَسَخَهُ, or he has actually a right to cancel it and annul it. وَرَجَعَ بِالْمَبِيء, and take back his... He can actually take back whatever he is missing. He can take it back. Whatever he had sold, he can take it back. Because لأن من شرط صحة هذه العقود التراضي والإكراه يعدم الرضا فيفسدها. Because all of these contracts, they're based on mutual satisfaction and agreement. And if there was no agreement, meaning if there was no genuine satisfaction of it, then that means because the compulsion that he had, the force that he was under, that essentially took away his satisfaction. So, and his free will about it. So this would be what you call a bay fasid. It would be a vitiated transaction, which means that it has to be cancelled, right? Or he can carry on. Now, this is if it was that severe, right? Which was that he's either going to be killed, is threatened with killing, then he wasn't killed, obviously, because he did it, or with severe beating. On the other hand, if he was threatened by just a few flogs, 1 day of imprisonment, then لأنه لا يبالى به بالنظر إلى العادة. This is a very interesting point. He's saying that if that was the threat, not the earlier threat, but it was this lighter threat, then he wouldn't, and he sold or he bought, then he doesn't have a right to take back. And the reason is that these things are casual things that could happen, and they're not really seen as very serious. He's saying بالنظر إلى العادة, based on the norm of that time, that somebody might be flogged. It was something casual that the police or whatever might flog somebody on the street. I think nowadays, it is taken seriously for a person to be in prison for a day, although lots of people go to prison for like domestic abuse and things like that, or even accusations against that. But I would think that it depends on the person, right? It depends on the person. So we'd have to judge it. إلا إذا كان الرجل صاحب منصب يعلم أنه يستضر به لفوات الرضا. Unless it's a person who is of a high position or a special status, and he know that he would, if he was to be flogged, if he was to be put into prison even for 1 day, he'd lose his job. Like for example, a lawyer or somebody who would, whose whole career would be jeopardized for something like that. Then in that case, it means that he doesn't have a choice. He's lost his free will in that case. That means even a simple strike there, or a public kind of strike, or a being in prison even for a day, that would be the same as the severe threat for him, even though it's a lighter threat for other people. So I think it depends on the social standing a person has as well, right? Because it's about the harm that could come to a person and their reputation eventually. If it's a young guy who just, has a lot of misdemeanors like that, and they've been in and out of prison and things like that, or even other people, right, who it's not going to affect that badly. So it would have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis like that. وَإِنْ كَانَ قَبَضَ الثَّمَنَ طَوْعًا فَقَدْ أَجَازَ الْبَيْء. Now, in all of these cases, when he's told to sell, for example, right, he shouldn't take the money. He should, okay, I'm selling it, I'll sell it to save my life, but he should refuse to take the money. Because they're saying that if he takes the money, then that means he is fully satisfied with it. So don't take the money. وَإِنْ كَانَ قَبَضَ الثَّمَنَ طَوْعًا, unless he was forced and it was pushed into his hand, thrown into his house. That's different. But if he went and took the money, okay, if I'm saying to him, I'm in the money, right? وَإِنْ كَانَ قَبَضَ الثَّمَنَ طَوْعًا, if he took it willingly, if he took the money willingly, فَقَدْ أَجَازَ الْبَيْء, that means he has approved the transaction. لِأَنَّهُ دَلِيلُ الْإِجَازَةِ, because that's seen as proof for approval. كَمَا فِي الْبَيْءِ الْمَوْقُوفِ, just as in the case where if he'd done a transaction that was considered to be contingent or suspended on his approval, and then he said, okay, fine, give me the money, I'm doing it, right? Now, of course, there may be situations, I'm just thinking hypothetically, that there may be situations where he's forced. They've already covered that anyway, that if he didn't take it willingly, and it's not shown willingly that he took it willingly, it's not shown that he's taken it willingly, then he has still recourse to cancel the transaction. Basically, he shouldn't do anything to show that he's actually satisfied with it. That's the simple way to look at this, right? He should not show that he's satisfied. وَإِنْ كَانَ قَبَضَهُ مُكْرَهًا, if he had to take possession of whatever it is, right, out of compulsion as well, فَلَيْسَ بِإِجَازَةٍ, that's not considered his approval. لِعَدَمِ الرِّضَى, because he doesn't have approval, he is not satisfied, right? وَعَلَيْهِ رَدُّهُ إِنْ كَانَ قَائِمًا فِي يَدِهِ لِفَسَادِ الْعَقْدِ, because that transaction was a vitiated transaction and a corrupt transaction, he has a right to return that afterwards, once he's in a safe zone, right, for example. Okay, now when you read Kitab al-Buyu, you'll understand the aspects of this. If during this case the person, let's say a person, God forbid, was forced to sell something, the other person takes that car or that very valuable item, whatever it is, and it suffered a damage. It was damaged in that process when it's with the other person who pays liability. Because this guy, when he's in a safe zone or when he's got the authority with him or something, he can cancel the transaction and want it returned, right? But then what happens if it's already damaged? Who pays the damage? وإن كان قد هلك المبيء في يد المشتري وهو المشتري غير مكره والبائع مكره ضمن المشتري قيمته للبائع. So person A is forced to sell to person B, right? And person B is not the one who was forced to buy it, right? The seller was the one forced to buy it. And then it got damaged in the possession of that buyer. That buyer will be liable for its value now. He can't give it back because it's damaged in a way that it takes it out of its intended purpose. So he has to now pay the market value for that back to the seller. لِتَلَفِ مَالِ الْغَيْرِ فِي يَدِهِ مِنْ غَيْرِ عَقْدٍ صَحِيحٍ وَتَلْزَمُهُ الْقِيمَةِ, right? So it's not the price that they agreed to sell at, because most likely he was forced to sell at a very cheap price. So it's not that price that he'll get back. He'll actually get whatever the market rate so that he can replace it. Or maybe he can replace it, but at least it's the value. Because the other person has destroyed something, consumed something, used up something that was not acquired by him, meaning we're talking about the buyer. It was not acquired by him through a valid contract. So that means he had no right. So that's why he has to pay the value of it, not just the price that was paid, which could be very less. And remember, this is only in the case where the purchaser was also not, or was not, the one forced, right, who did it willingly. Because if he was forced, also there was a third person that was forcing both of them to sell to this guy to sell to him, and he didn't really want to buy it, but he had to buy it, then the liability of this, the damage of this, is going to be on the head of the compeller, the third person, rather than any of the trading parties. Now in this case, the one who was compelled to sell or buy, right, and then his item got damaged when he's able to take back his item, right? It says وَلِلْمُكْرَهِ أَن يُضَمِّنَ الْمُكْرِهَ إِنْ شَاءَ. So rather than charge the mushtari, the person who bought it from him, he can actually charge directly the one who compelled him to sell, right? Because obviously he was instrumental in doing this. He was the one who, while he did not damage it, the damage was done by the mushtari, but because he's the one who, the compeller was the one who forced him to sell it. So he's the one who was instrumental in having this whole setup come about that way. So that's why he can charge him as well, right? Instead, he can charge directly and say he's liable, right? All right, the next issue then he discusses is al-ikrahu ala akli al-maytati wa nahwiha, as I described in the introduction, that these are now talking about those cases where of severe force, where in some cases you should do it, in other cases you shouldn't do it, and the third case of you have a choice, right? So let's take the first one, which is where you're going to have to, it's better for you to fulfill it, because if you didn't fulfill the threat, sorry, if you did not fulfill what you were forced to do, then you would actually be sinful, right? What is that? وَمَنْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ الْمَيْتَةَ. So I think I'll just explain it very simply for you so that you understand this before we read it. Number one, if a person is forced by severe force, right, to eat something haram or drink something haram like wine, right, or swine, pig meat, and if he doesn't, he's going to die or be very severely punished, then in that case, if he should eat it, because it becomes mubah for him, it becomes permitted for him. So if he didn't eat it and held out and was killed for it, or was severely beaten for it, he'd actually be sinful. Why is he sinful? Because it had become permissible for him. That's why. And he didn't do a permissible act to save his life. It's more important to save your life in that case, right? So in brief, that's what it is. Second one is, if he's forced to kill somebody, otherwise he's going to be killed, he's not allowed to do that. He'd be rewarded for not doing that. He's not even allowed to do that, right? He just has to let it take its course. He doesn't have discretion to do that, because he'll probably kill them, they'll probably kill him anyway, or whatever it is, right? But that's not the reason. He's just not allowed to do that. And the third case is where you have a choice, but it's better not to do it, is if you're forced to utter a word of disbelief towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to curse the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then in that case, only if it's a severe case, then you're allowed to utter those things, those blasphemies, by the tongue, while your heart is completely clear and completely in belief. There's an allowance for that mentioned in the Quran. So there you have a discretion, but it's better not to say those things and rather take the punishment, right? You'll be rewarded for that. Whereas in the case of refusing to eat pork, right, to save yourself a severe beating or being killed, that's not praiseworthy. You'd rather eat in that case, however bad that is. If it's a lesser case of force, then in the case of uttering a blasphemy would not be allowed. So let's look at this all in detail, but those are the three scenarios, right? That's the case of eating something haram, killing somebody, or doing something blasphemous in the faith. وَمَنْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ الْمَيْتَةَ أَوِ الدَّمَ أَوْ لَحْمَ الْخِنْزِيرِ أَوْ يَشْرَبَ الْخَمْرَ وَأُكْرِهَ عَلَىٰ ذَلِكَ بِغَيْرِ مُلْجِئٍ. Whoever is forced to eat carrion, right, dead meat, or consume blood, or anything to do with that, or pork, swine, the flesh of swine, or drink wine, and the compulsion there is not the severe one, but it's where, you'll get flogged a bit, you'll get beaten up lightly, you'll get ruffled, you'll get maybe a short stint in a prison or something. لا يخاف منه التلف على النفس, where there's no fear of losing your life in that case, or any of your limbs being completely, damaged forever. لم يحل له الإقدام. He's not allowed to do these things. He's not allowed to eat or consume or drink these things. إذ لا ضرورة في إكراه غير ملجئ, because this is the non-severe one. You'd rather bear those threats, and rather than do these things which are haram. They don't become permissible in this case. However, if he did end up drinking in this case, in a Muslim state, would he be flogged for drinking? If he can prove that he did it under duress, then he won't be flogged for that, whereas another person would be flogged, right? Okay. The only time that he would be allowed to consume these things is when it is severe, case of losing a limb or a life, right? So فَإِذَا خَافَ ذَلِكَ وَسِعَهُ أَن يُقْدِمَ عَلَى مَا أُكْرِهَ لَهُ. Then he has the scope, if he is under that kind of duress, then he does have the scope to take on these things. بل Maydani clarifies بل يجب عليه, in fact it's obligatory for him to consume. Imam Quduri doesn't mention that, but he doesn't mention it here. He mentioned in the next sentence, but Imam Maydani clarifies from right now that in fact it's obligatory for him. That is why Imam Quduri then said ولا يسعه أي لا يجوز له أن يصبر على ما توعد به. He's not allowed, in fact he doesn't have that scope to avoid eating that thing, and he's not allowed to just say, I'm going to withhold this, I'm going to withhold myself, and I'm going to, just take the beating and be killed, or, I don't mind being severely beaten, right? Then Imam Quduri himself says, فَإِن صَبَرَ حَتَّى أَوْقَعُوا بِهِ فِعْلًا وَلَمْ يَأْكُلْ فَهُوَ آثِمٌ. That if he resists such that they see their threat through and he did not eat, he would be sinful. لأنه لما أبيح له. And the technical usuli reason for that is very simple. Those things now, because of the level of pressure, become permissible for him to eat. They become permissible for him to eat. They're no longer completely haram in that particular scenario. Not forever, just in that particular scenario. Because by him resisting, he's saying, he is assisting somebody else in his own death. So he'd be sinful, or for being beaten up. He's literally assisting them by not eating, where he has the right to eat. So it's a very interesting usuli discussion. Just like he was allowed to eat it if he was in the state of makhmasa, which basically means that if he was in a state of extreme hunger and he was going to die if he didn't eat or drink, so then he would be allowed to eat in that situation as well. Okay, وَإِنْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَى الْكُفْرِ بِاللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Now second scenario, this is the one where he has a bit of a choice, but it's better not to. If he was put under pressure, extreme or under pressure, yes, to utter kufr and blasphemy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or curse the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was threatened by imprisonment or by by imprisonment or some beating, then lam yakun dhalika ikrahan. That's not considered to be the full pressure to allow them to do that, right? Because these kind of pressures, to be imprisoned for a short while or to be slightly beaten, that wasn't even seen as a valid compelling reason for discretion when it came to drinking wine, right? As we saw, it was a light one, right? That didn't even allow wine to be permitted. So how would kufr be permitted, right? More conclusively, can't be permitted. Yes, if it becomes more severe, حتى يكره بأمر يخاف منه على نفسه وعلى عضو من أعضائه. If it's such compulsion and pressure that the person is now fearful over his life, right? Or losing a limb, any limb, they're going to beat him so badly that they're going to lose usage of a limb, then he has a right to just express with his tongue what they're telling him to do, right? Whether that be in whichever country, right? But inside he must be very clear and with full conviction that he doesn't agree with what's going on. فَإِذَا أَظْهَرَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى لِسَانِهِ. If he does express this on his tongue, وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ, but his heart is fully convinced of his faith and satisfied with it, فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ, then he's not sinful for that because of that extreme duress he is under, right? Because by just that expression, that doesn't take away his faith. His faith is in his heart, okay? And his heart is completely satisfied with that. And the thing is that if he avoided doing that, if he didn't do that expression at least, then he would be killed. So he has the discretion to do the expression. However, in this case, if he persisted and refused and withheld and resisted, حتى قتل, until he was killed or whatever, or lost the limb, ولم يظهر الكفر, and he did not even utter that with his tongue, كان مأجورا, he is going to be rewarded for that. Because in this case, his resistance was the sake of the glory of the deen, and that is seen worthy enough, right? So that in that case, he would be rewarded for that. So the next part is وَإِنْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَى إِتْلَافِ مَالِ امْرِئٍ مُسْلِمٍ بِأَمْرٍ يَخَافُ مِنْهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. He's being pushed to destroy somebody else's wealth, some other Muslim's wealth, to do some property damage, and he's being threatened with in a way that he's worried about himself. So he's being threatened, and he's put under a lot of pressure that something's going to happen to either his life or again one of his limbs. So what do you think? Would he be allowed to destroy somebody else's property to save his life or to save a limb of his? What do you guys think? So he says, وَسِعَهُ أَن يَفْعَلَ ذَلِكَ. So we're on page 235, just in case you're following. So yes, he has the scope to do that, to undertake that. Why? Somebody else's property. Well, you see, the comparison is between somebody else's property and a human life. Which one is going to take precedence there? لأن مال الغير يستباح للضرورة. Because somebody else's wealth becomes permissible under extreme need, and this is an extreme need. So for example, let's just say it was their food and you were in extreme need to just survive, literally just to survive, as they say, saddur ramaq in Arabic, just to stay alive, literally, not to enjoy yourself. You could eat their food, right? Yeah, you'll be liable to them afterwards or not, but that's besides the point. But are you allowed in that case to undertake the act of destroying their property? كما في حالة المخمصة. So he says, yeah, just as you would be able to do that if you were in need of eating something, consuming something of somebody else as well. So likewise here, if you had to destroy it under pressure to save your life, you're allowed to do that, because there is enough darura here, which basically means that there's enough of a need established. However, afterwards, the owner of that wealth, that asset, he can reclaim. So وَلِصَاحِبِ الْمَالِ أَن يُضَمِّنَ الْمُكْرِهَ لِأَنَّ الْمُكْرَهَ كَالْآلَةِ. So who is the owner going to charge and reclaim from? So he has the right to reclaim from the people who put the person under pressure, from the person who compelled, because the person who was compelled, he's just like in between, right? He didn't do it entirely of his own volition and free will. He was forced to do it to save his life. So there's two things that are being discussed here. One is that anybody under that pressure of basically fear of their death or of their life or their limb, is he allowed to destroy somebody else's wealth? That, hey, if you don't destroy his car and do this arson or whatever it is, then we're going to kill you and we're going to kill your family, for example. So he set fire to the property. Those guys can then reclaim from the people that were that put this guy under pressure. Right, now moving up a notch, what happens if somebody is forced to kill somebody, take another life, to save his own life? So you see, before it was a discussion between a human life and human non-life property. So the human life took precedence. What about if it's a human life for a human life? If you don't kill that person, we're gonna take your life. وَإِنْ أُكْرِهَ بِقَتْلٍ عَلَى قَتْلِ غَيْرِهِ لَمْ يَسَعْهُ أن يقدم عليه ويصبر حتى يقتل. So in that case, there's no comparison. So if somebody is compelled and pressured and threatened to kill somebody else on the fear of having himself killed, right? If he doesn't, then he'll get killed himself. He doesn't have the scope to embark on that, and he should just withhold, he should just abstain, he should just bide his time or whatever. If that means him being killed, well, let it be the case, but he's not allowed to kill somebody else and become sinful. فَإِن قَتَلَهُ, if he did kill somebody else to save his life, he would be sinful, right? لأن قتل المسلم مما لا يستباح لضرورة ما. Because killing another Muslim, that's not going to ever become permissible to take the life of another Muslim for any need. Yes, if it was a life for a life, that's a different issue, that he's become violable then, right? But in the case of just an innocent guy, never does an innocent person's life become permissible to take under any condition, even in extreme conditions. It never becomes permissible. فَكَذَا بِهَذِهِ الضَّرُورَةِ. So even for this need, it doesn't become permissible because it's equal. So you can't take one for one. Then you just let it play out the way it is. وَلَكِنِ الْقِصَاصُ عَلَى الَّذِي أَكْرَهُ إِنْ كَانَ الْقَتْلُ عَمْدًا. So if he does kill the person purposefully, right, to save his life under that pressure, is there anything that is affected by that, or is it just like then he will be killed for taking that guy's life? That's why he's saying the qisas, which means the retaliation, the serious retaliation for the life that he is taking. So let's just say person A was threatened with his own life to kill person B, right, by person C, right? So he killed person B. Now, who's going to pay the retaliation in this case? Who's going to be guilty of that? Person A or person C, right? The compeller or the compelled one. So he's saying the qisas will be upon the one who forced him, who threatened him and forced him, if that killing was done purposely. So he actually purposely went and killed the person, in a premeditated style, obviously under threat, but he decided to do it. Hidayah says that this is according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, the Tarafain. Imam Zufar says the qisas, the retaliation, because it was not permissible at all, there's no lightening of that punishment, so it will be, the retaliation will be on the person who killed, which means the compelled individual, the one who did it under duress. Imam Abu Yusuf said, no, it'll be on none of them, because none of them are to blame. Why? Because, well, not that none of them are to blame, but none of them can be charged for it, because the compelled one, he obviously did it under duress, and the compeller didn't do it himself. Right? So those are the reasoning, so you can't really pinpoint anybody there. قال الإسبيجابي والصحيح قول أبي حنيفة ومحمد, that the strongest opinion or the sound opinion according to Isbijabi is Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad's opinion, which is essentially that the compeller, that's person C who compelled person A, he will be liable to pay the retaliation with that, whether that means retaliation with life or a ransom. وَمَشَى عَلَيْهِ الْأَئِمَّةُ كَمَا هُوَ الرَّسْمُ. And that is what the other imams, the other jurists have also preferred, Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Hanifa's view. Okay? Right, now moving on to slightly lesser things. Somebody is compelled to divorce his wife. That could be from the wife's family. He's not divorcing her and they want out. They want him to divorce their wife, or it's the family of somebody else who wanted to marry that girl, for example. So they get to the husband who is married and they force him to divorce his wife. So what happens in that case? وَإِنْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَى طَلَاقِ إِمْرَأَتِهِ أَوْ نِكَاحِ إِمْرَأَةٍ. So whoever is compelled to divorce his wife or to marry a certain woman, particular woman, أَوْ عِتْقَ عَبْدِهِ, or to free his slave, فَفَعَلَ, and he does so. So will the divorce or the marriage take place? Because clearly he's not doing it, with satisfaction. He's not doing it with free will. He's doing it under duress. وَقَعَ مَا أُكْرِهَ عَلَيْهِ. Yes, it will take place. It will occur. It'll be implemented. لأنها تصح مع الإكراه, because these things are such that even under duress they're considered by the Sharia to be valid acts and valid transactions. So by him saying, by him divorcing, that divorce will take place even though it was under duress and he didn't want to do it. كما تصح مع الهزل. Just like this is something which would have happened even if he joked about it. So if he jokingly said to his wife, you're divorced. Some of you may not know this, but there's 3 things which if you do even jokingly, in complete jest and not seriously, they're still taken seriously. That's what the hadith says. ثَلَاثٌ جِدُّهُنَّ جِدٌّ وَهَزْلُهُنَّ جِدٌّ. That's nikah. If you marry, if a couple get married just for show, not seriously, but just I take you in marriage and I accept in front of the minimum witnesses, even if the mahr, dowry, was not mentioned, they're married. Right? Whether they like it or not, they're married. You don't have an intention to seriously marry. Even as a joke, it'll be done. And likewise, if somebody divorces his wife jokingly, it's not. So you never mess with these things unless you're serious about doing them. So in this case as well, if you're forced to do it, it will be counted as well. وَيَرْجِعُ الْمُكْرَهُ. You will have read this in the other section of talaq, right? That discussion would have come there in your other subject that you'll be studying at the same time. وَيَرْجِعُ الْمُكْرَهُ عَلَى الَّذِي أَكْرَهُ بِقِيمَةِ الْعَبْدِ. Now, if it was the case that he was forced to free his slave, and now he is out of that, so who gets charged for that, right? So we'll discuss that. This compelled individual who had freed his slave, he is able to reclaim the price of that slave, the value that he's lost now, right, from his compeller. When he is in the position to do so, he can reclaim from them, because he was the one who had become the means of him divorcing, freeing his slave. So we can blame him for it and charge him for it. فَلَهُ أَن يُضَمِّنَهُ مُوسِرًا كَانَ أَوْ مُعْسِرًا. Whether the guy has the money or not, he can charge him. لِكَوْنِهِ ضَمَانَ إِتْلَافٍ. Because that is going to be considered to be the liability or the price for his destroying his property. Because when you when you manumit a slave, when you free a slave, you are losing your property. Right? If you want to do it, great, but he didn't want to do it. Right. Now, the next point is when it comes to the women, so I'm going to spend a few minutes in this conclusion to finish off the few mas'alas here, because in the next lesson we can go on to the next chapter. So just bear with me in this conclusion, this concluding part. So let's just say that he was forced to divorce his wife. Now, it depends on when he divorced her. If he had divorced straight after getting married without having any consummation, so they never met, they just had a nikah done, and there was no consummation, there was no meeting maybe, in fact, as well. So usually in that case, what happens is, and if there had been a stipulation of a mahr, of a dowry, for whatever that was, so that's why he's saying that he could claim back from his compeller half the dowry of his wife in the case of being forced to divorce his wife, if that divorce was forced before he had any kind of consummation with her, and as long as the mahr was already fixed of whatever. So he is liable for half. So the reason why he can do that is because this is based on the fact of a hypothetical scenario. If somebody gets married to someone, doesn't have any consummation, because once you have consummation, the full mahr becomes necessary. And if no mahr had been stipulated, then her average mahr of her family becomes stipulated by default. So we're talking about a case where there was no mahr necessary. No mahr mentioned. Then in that case, it's usually half a mahr. Now, the problem is that the issue is that if somebody gets married to somebody and then she, before consummation, she reneges from Islam, she does kufr, she does ridda, as we say, right? Then she is the one who's become the source of breaking that marriage. He doesn't owe her anything in that case. Now, what's the likelihood of that happening? Probably very less, but that's a possibility. Now, what happened is they had gotten married, no consummation. We're not sure what they're going to do. But because of the possibility that his wife, 1%, could have reneged from her faith and thus cancelled out anything for him to pay, he wouldn't have to pay anything. What happens in between that, before any of that could happen, this compeller comes and forces him to divorce his wife, which means the ruling is that if he divorces his wife, then half the mahr becomes necessary. And he did that. So essentially he was forced to divorce his wife. So now he doesn't have the option that she may have stopped it from her side and thus dropped any mahr from him. Right? So because of that ihtimal, because of that possibility that she could have done that, and that the chance of that was never given, so that's why he has to pay the half, and thus he can reclaim that, right? Because once he's divorced her, there's no possibility of her breaking it off because he's broken it off. So he's to blame now in that sense, and he's to blame because of the guy who compelled him to do so. That's why. Okay. Now, had he, the condition there was that it was before consummation, because once you have consummation, then the mahar becomes established anyway, regardless. And if there was no mahar mentioned, then he still has to give a mut'ah. If he, mut'ah means a pair of clothing, and that's if he had divorced her, which in this case he did divorce her. So ultimately, he divorced her, right? And it's seen as him divorcing her, so he's made a liability for himself, and he can reclaim that. Okay, quickly, the last point, two more points here. وَإِنْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَى الزِّنَا. If a person was compelled to commit fornication, he didn't want to, but he was compelled to do so because he was going to lose his life or limb, then does he get punished for that? Is he allowed to do that? He's not allowed to do that. So he would be, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, he would actually be receiving the penalty for that, right? He would be receiving the serious penalty for that, unless it's the Sultan who had forced him to do so. Because remember, we said that the Sultan can do whatever he wants. Not that he's allowed to do whatever he wants, but he has the power to do whatever he wants. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, only from the Sultan would we consider him being compelled, from nobody else. Of course, Imam Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, they viewed this differently. They said that anybody who you think will be able to carry out what they're warning you, right, even if it's not the Sultan, from them you can have compulsion as well. So you would be also excused if that was the case, that he wouldn't be. So according to Imam Abu Hanifa, if it was the Sultan that forced him, then he wouldn't be punished for that. Otherwise, he would be punished for anybody else. Whereas Sahibain say that if it was anybody that he reckons that could have carried out the murder for him or to break his limbs, right, then in that case he would also get out of the liability of paying the punishment for that, right? Yeah. And then the last point was, if somebody forces somebody to come out of faith, as we already discussed, وَإِنْ أُكْرِهَ رَجُلٌ عَلَى الرِّدَّةِ لَمْ تَبِنْ إِمْرَأَتُهُ مِنْهُ. This is just saying that if it was the man who was forced to renege, as we discussed earlier, does it impact his wife? Sorry, does it impact his marriage? We said that it doesn't impact his iman because he's got it in his heart, but outwardly, if he did what he did, would it impact his wife? Would he be divorced? Because usually with apostasy, a separation between husband and wife takes place. So he's saying in this case, no, it will not be lam tabi. His wife will not be separated from him, because his heart is completely fine and he didn't really want to do that. So his faith is intact. So he's not going to take that outward expression in a state of duress to be, to have all of its normal ramifications of divorce as well, right? So there you go. Alhamdulillah, that ends our 6th lesson. That also ends our chapter of Kitabul Iqra, of compulsion. Hopefully that's given us an understanding of how to deal with these issues. Inshallah, in the next one, we'll move on to the next chapter. Allah bless you all and keep us all wise and white thread in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.